Welcome. Last week we had, I think it was last week, 2 weeks ago, Ronna Romney McDaniel, the chairman of the Republican Party. This week we welcome Tom Perez, the chairman of the Democratic Party, in our continuing The Most Thankless Job in America series here at the IOP. But we're very pleased to have him here tonight at a very momentous time in our politics. As always, I want to thank our partners here at International House. It feels like we almost live over here, and we are thankful for their hospitality. I just want to mention an upcoming event next Monday, October 30th. Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe and former South Carolina Governor Jim Hodges will be in conversation with our IOP fellow, Bakari Sellers, about their experiences as Democratic governors in the South. We will take questions after a while, and this evening, as always, we will prioritize the first 3 questions for students. And as always, I ask you to make sure that your question ends in a question mark and is actually a question. Please make sure your phones are silent. And now, to formally introduce our speaker is Zach Stepp. Zach is a 4th-year student from Cleveland, Ohio, studying political science, and he is currently the events chair on our student advisory board. And we thank him for all of that. Welcome, Zach.
All right, thank you, David. And yeah, thank you all for being here tonight. I have the honor of introducing you all to Mr. Tom Perez, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Mr. Perez has headed the DNC since being elected in a tight race for party chair back in February of this year. Since his election, Mr. Perez has been tasked with uniting a party still roiling from a divisive party primary, followed by the upset election of President Trump. Before his role as party chair, Mr. Perez served as the 26th United States Secretary of Labor. At the Department of Labor, Mr. Perez oversaw the Obama administration's labor initiatives, which included expanding the overtime rule, combating worker misclassification, expanding paid sick leave, and assisting Americans with disabilities. Mr. Perez has been in public service since he started his career as a civil rights attorney at the U.S. Department of Justice, where he prosecuted some of the department's highest-profile civil rights cases. Later in his career, Mr. Perez would serve as Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, where he led the restorations of the Civil Rights Division following the George W. Bush administration. Moderating this session will be a familiar face, Ms. Karen Tumulty, who is the national political correspondent for The Washington Post and one of our fantastic IOP fellows this quarter. Without further ado, join me in welcoming Mr. Tom Perez and Karen Tumulty.
Wow, full house. Great to be here tonight. And thank you very much for being here with us.
With all of you. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, as David said, a couple of weeks ago, we had Ronna McDaniel, your counterpart with the Republican Party here. Though her situation is very different from yours in that when you have a president of your own party in the White House, the party chairman or chairwoman's job is very different. So what exactly does, in your view, a Democratic Party chairman do?
Sure. Well, the DNC is a partnership of 50 state parties in our 7 territories, and our mission is to help elect Democrats up and down the ticket from the school board to the Oval Office. And we do that by making sure we have strong parties everywhere and strong partnerships everywhere. So we work with our partners in the labor movement. We work with our partners in Planned Parenthood, our partners in the business community, our partners in the grassroots faith communities. And our goal is to make sure we're electing Democrats up and down the ticket, because I learned, having had the privilege of working in the Obama administration and working in state and local government as well, that when you have those opportunities to serve, you put those values into action. Values such as access to health care being a right for all and not a privilege for a few, making sure that dreamers can dream, and not be deported. Elections have consequences, and we're seeing those consequences now.
And so is your job primarily a job of making sure that all the resources are in the right place, or figuring out what the party's message ought to be?
Well, I would describe our job as both an infrastructure job and a messaging job. I'm kind of like Tom the plumber, okay? And here's what I mean by that. In order to win elections, you got to be out there organizing. And frankly, Karen, in the aftermath of 2016 and beyond, we did a very important deep dive. I do sports a lot, and so if you lose a football game, or frankly, if you win a football game, you go, you watch the game film, you figure out what you did right, what you did wrong, what your opponents did right, what your opponents did wrong, and you fix it and improve.
But it's not just that the Democratic Party lost the presidential election. Over the past 8 years, the Democrats have been absolutely decimated on the state level.
And you took the words right out of my mouth, because we didn't simply watch game film from 2016. We're looking back over the course of the last 8 years, asking the question, why did we lose 1,000 seats in state legislatures? Why did we go from 60 senators to 48 in the U.S. Senate? Why did we go from 30 governors into the teens? Why did we lose the secretaries of state, state attorneys general, state treasurers, auditors, et cetera? That was the question we asked.
And what was the answer?
And the answer was, we stopped organizing everywhere. We became all too frequently the party of the coasts and a few states in between. We had the technology advantage and we squandered it because we didn't invest sufficiently. I remember going to an African-American church in Detroit, and a woman looking at me with passion saying, "You've got to stop showing up every 4th October telling me that you care." I met a gentleman in rural Wisconsin. The northwest corner used to be the seat held by Dave Obey, a good Democrat who left, I think, in 2012. And he said to me, "I feel politically homeless." And so what I learned is that we've got to organize. Democrats, we've all too frequently been mobilizing. I used to run marathons. You don't wake up in the morning and decide, I'm going to run a marathon today. You got to train for that marathon. And similarly, you got to win elections. Elections for office in 2018 are won and lost in 2017. That's what we learned in Nevada. We ran the table in the state of Nevada in 2016 because we had organizers on the ground in 2015. And so the new DNC, number one, we've changed our mission statement, as I've described before. We used to be the party de facto that only helped elect the president every 4 years, and we became an accordion. We expand in a presidential, we shrink in between, and we scratch our head and wonder why we lose midterms. The new DNC is focused on winning elections up and down the ticket, and we have invested in races for state legislative seats this year in Oklahoma, in New Hampshire, down in Florida, and we've won them all by putting a simple formula in place: organizing, having good candidates, and delivering that message. We've also learned, Karen, that we need to up our game on technology. So part of our mantra of rebuilding, organizing, modernizing, we had the tech advantage under Howard Dean, and we lost that tech advantage because the Republican Party spent almost $200 million on technology, and they were able to regain that advantage. The good news from my perspective is that we have hired a spectacular team. We know what we need to do. We're getting a lot of help from people in the tech ecosystem. And I'm confident that we can do this because we have to build that infrastructure, and we have to couple that infrastructure with the messaging. We have to speak to people and articulate what I've known throughout my life, which is that the Democratic Party has always had your back. We fight for Social Security in the 30s. We fought and passed Medicare and Medicaid in the 60s, the Affordable Care Act, the Civil Rights Act, and we will always continue to have your back. And people lost sight of that because our messaging wasn't consistent, and because, frankly, we weren't showing up everywhere. So our new motto in our state partnerships is every zip code counts. We're not only showing up everywhere, we're putting our values into action everywhere.
Well, you guys had one big fail fairly recently in Georgia, the special election down there. A lot of people thought that was gettable for the Democrats. It ended up costing, $50 million, the most expensive House race in history. Have you looked at the game film on that one? What was the problem there?
Let's look at two different sets of issues. Let's look at all the special elections in Congress, and then let's look at special elections across states, because I think they're very instructive. We usually lose that seat in Georgia 6 by 20 to 25 points. We lost it by, I think it was 4. We've lost the seat in South Carolina 5, usually by about 20 points. We lost that seat by 3 points.
By the way, you wish there was more resources put into that and less into Georgia?
Well, I knocked on some doors for Archie Parnell, and I was there with the local Indivisible chapter. And what I learned from that is, again, we were able to narrow the gap through organizing, but we didn't have enough time. And what we have to do, and what we are doing, quite frankly, right now, is we're organizing in Georgia 5 and in South Carolina 5. We're organizing elsewhere. The upshot of all those special elections is you got to remember that those were beat red districts. And we were able to close the gap significantly. There are 71 congressional districts that are more competitive than Georgia 6. We need to get 24 to turn over the House. Now, contrast this with the work we've been doing at the state level, where there have been a number of special elections in state legislative districts. I mentioned Oklahoma. 3 races in Oklahoma for state legislative districts, all in areas where Donald Trump won by easy double-digit margins. We won all 3 of those. How? We had boots on the ground, we had good candidates, and we had a great message, and it was about education. In New Hampshire, a seat that had been in Republican hands since 1984, turned over to the Democrats. Again, same message. Down in Florida, a state Senate seat that last year the Republican won by a double-digit margin, we were able to win there. And there are other examples. What we have to do is scale those, and Virginia and New Jersey provide that example, that opportunity, I should say.
Well, so next year, really, history would suggest ought to be a really good year for you. First of all, Donald Trump's approval rating is as low as we have ever seen it for a president at this point in his term. Presidents traditionally see their party lose seats in the first midterm election. In fact, the only time since the Great Depression that a president has picked up seats in his first midterm was George W. Bush right after 9/11. But there's a lot of tension in the Democratic Party now between the liberal wing, people think of it as the Bernie Sanders wing, ironically, though he's not a Democrat, and the sort of traditionalist Democrat. So you have all these things going for you. What would screw it up?
Well, you mentioned 2018. I think there's actually opportunities in less than 2 weeks in 2017.
Right.
And 2017 is shaping up a lot like 2005. In 2005, we had a very unpopular president pursuing a very unpopular agenda with a very unpopular right-wing Congress amid a culture of corruption. And 2005, and by the way, imagine what would have happened if Social Security had been privatized right before the Great Recession. What a disaster for our seniors that would have been. 2005 was the last year that the Democrats won both New Jersey and Virginia. And I think we're poised to do it again. And we're poised to do it again. And we made a 7-figure investment in Virginia because we want to demonstrate what the model of success is. And we've made significant investments in New Jersey as well. And the model is organizing. The model is using your tech infrastructure. 0% of our investment in Virginia has been on television. 100% has been on field, hiring organizers, digital engagement. And I believe that the wind at our back that we get from not only those state special elections, but from Virginia and from New Jersey, and we're not simply helping Ralph Northam and Justin Fairfax and Phil Murphy and Sheila Oliver at the top of the ticket. We're investing in legislative districts because, again, school board to the Senate. We flip 17 House of Delegates districts in Virginia. We flip the House. There are 17 Republican members of House of Delegates districts that Hillary Clinton won. So we know where to focus, and we're doing that. And then what we do is we carry that over. And we have taken the term off year out of our lexicon. And so we take the infrastructure we have built in Virginia, and we hand it over to Tim Kaine, who's in cycle. Tim, in turn, wins. He hands it over to the House of Delegates and Senate candidates, because in 2019 in Virginia, their entire state house is up. They then hand it over to the presidential. Those are the virtuous cycles of 12-month a year organizing and engagement. That's how you build relationships, because Joe Biden taught me that all politics is personal. And when you are transactional, you show up every 4th October at a church and say, vote for me, that's not the key to success. When you build long-term relationships like Barack Obama did, like Bill Clinton did, like my former boss Ted Kennedy did in abundance, that's how you win elections.
Well, what about, though? I mean, certainly the Republican Party has got a lot of tension, but the Democrats have some tension in their party, too. And specifically between the left and the, again, I guess more establishment. I mean, back in April, you and Bernie Sanders had gone on a unity tour and had gotten some flack for campaigning for a mayoral candidate in Omaha who has a record that is not pro-choice. And afterwards, Nancy Pelosi said, you know, we cannot afford these purity tests on abortion, which I think surprised a lot of people. More recently, people have said, you know, single payer is the litmus test for Democrats. If you don't support Medicare for all, you can't really be a Democrat. First of all, what do you think of these kinds of arguments, and how do you deal with those?
Sure. Well, I mean, let's talk about unity. And you asked the question about various stakeholders in the party. And I think the best example of the progress that we're making, Karen, is in Virginia, once again. A guy named Tom Perez, former member of Congress, jumped into the race in Virginia. And the media, quite frankly, ate it up because they wrote what, with hindsight, I think you would acknowledge, was the exactly incorrect story. Another Bernie-Hillary proxy battle, because Senator Sanders was supporting Tom and Senator Warren was supporting Tom, and Mark Warner and Tim Kaine and Terry McAuliffe were supporting Ralph Northam. And here's what happened. Two remarkably qualified candidates who agree on basically everything. Their emphasis is different. They ran a spirited high road campaign. And what happened in the end? There was record turnout. 8 years ago, slightly over 300,000 people voted on the Democratic side. This time, over 500,000 people voted. When Tom realized he had lost, that night he immediately pivoted and made a full-throated endorsement of Ralph Northam. I've campaigned with Tom, I've campaigned with Ralph. On the other side, and unfortunately the media did not report this because they weren't covering it. They were focused on the wrong battle with hindsight. Ed Gillespie won by 1 point over a guy who is so far to the right, he got fired by the Trump campaign. And the guy, Corey Stewart, who's now running against Tim Kaine, declared that I do not believe in unity. And I thought to myself, you go, Corey. And so we have work to do. And I've said repeatedly, including last weekend at our DNC meeting in Las Vegas, unity doesn't mean unanimity. It doesn't mean we agree on everything. I mean, I've got 4 siblings. And come to our Thanksgiving dinner table. You will see some spirited discussions, including disagreements. But what we do at the end is we come together around our shared values. And that's what we have to do as a party. And yes, there are days where it's challenging. And I totally get that. But I see what's happening in Virginia. And I'm glad I traveled with Senator Sanders because I want to make sure that everybody, whether you're a registered Democrat, Republican, or independent, understands that on the issues you care about the most, getting a good job, getting access to health care, having retirement security, all those education issues, we're on your side.
But does that mean that, say, on those issues, does that mean that, say, a candidate as this Omaha mayoral candidate who does not support abortion rights has a place and is welcome in the Democratic Party to be a Democratic candidate?
Listen, I'm proud of the Democratic Party's platform on a woman's right to choose. It's not simply a matter of reproductive health. I think it's a matter of women's economic security. And it's a proud part of our platform that not only commands the support of Democrats, it commands the support of the majority of Americans. At the same time, I know a number of people who have a strongly held personal belief on that issue. And it's not my role to ask them to change their opinion on that. And I wouldn't. But at the same time, they understand that Roe v. Wade is the law of the land. And it's important to respect that and not to put that personal view to have that trump Roe v. Wade. And so, I mean, when people ask about things like litmus tests, I say, look at the Republican Party. You know, Jeff Flake voted with Donald Trump 91% of the time. He voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which I think was a terrible vote for Arizona and a terrible vote for the nation. But apparently 91% is not enough, because the reason he got out, let's be honest, I don't think he can win a Republican primary. That's why he got out.
Well, it's interesting, because that was the point you made yesterday when Senator Flake made his announcement. And a lot of people noted that there was a real contrast between your statement, which pointed out how often he had voted with Trump, and some of the things that some of his Senate colleagues, Senator Schumer, he's one of the finest human beings I've met in politics. Tim Kaine called him an honest broker. Senator,
I don't know that I'm what I am saying is somebody can be a person of integrity, but I don't. That's distinct from your vote on the Affordable Care Act. I think the vote on the Affordable Care Act was a vote that hurts Arizonans and is a boon for rich people and is a terrible thing for the rest of America. That's distinct from, you know, whether you are a person of integrity. I'm not here to question Senator Flake's integrity. I think that would be unfair and untoward. But what I am here to say is it's pretty clear to me that his situation in Arizona is such that there's somebody to his right that would have beaten him in a Republican primary. So I'm not sure I'm saying anything that's significantly different from some of my colleagues on the Democratic side.
well, the tone was very different, though, of your statement, and again, a lot of his colleagues saying, you know, he's a man of great bravery and.
Well, I mean, John McCain voted against the Affordable Care Act. That was an act of courage. The repeal of the Affordable Care Act, that was an act of courage. And I cannot tell you, Karen, the number of people who stop me, who say, please keep fighting. My kid has a life-threatening illness. It keeps me up at night. I finally got coverage. Or someone else, another person I remember vividly. I am struggling in my family with opioid addiction, and I can't believe that our access to treatment is being put at risk. That's the act of courage, to make sure we're taking care of them. And so while I have personal respect for Jeff Flake, it was John McCain, who was the Arizona senator, who cast the deciding vote, quite literally the deciding vote on that issue, which is so fundamental to who we are.
Do you think there are going to be more Republicans like John McCain and Bob Corker and now Senator Flake, standing up and stressing their differences with Donald Trump, not on necessarily the issues, but really on the tone of his presidency, the priorities of his presidency? Or do you think at this point the party is so intimidated by the president's ability to sort of tweet out a string of insults, and also they are so eager to get tax reform that they're going to line up behind him? What is your best bet?
I think time will tell. And I think about that question a lot. Dr. King once said, I think it was in his letter from the Birmingham jail, we will live to rue not only the despicable acts of bad people, but the appalling silence of good people. And frankly, there's been a number of dark acts that have occurred since Donald Trump took office, whether it's the assault on immigrants. And I worked for Ted Kennedy. Immigration reform, whether it was Ronald Reagan or Alan Simpson and Ted Kennedy, it's always been bipartisan. And you see these assaults. And then you see these unmitigated personal attacks, like the attack on Senator Corker. Again, I have great professional respect for Senator Corker, for Senator Flake, and my critiques have nothing to do with my personal respect. Kennedy taught me that you never personalize, you work hard not to personalize politics. But the appalling silence of so many good people, I mean, look at what Senator Grassley said recently in connection with the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, and I don't have his exact words, but he said something like, there's like 10 really bad things about this bill. But, we told people we were going to repeal it, so I guess we got to vote for it. I mean, that is not leadership. And Barack Obama, his family, I want my kids to respect the office of the presidency. And it's really hard to when you have infantile behavior from this president. And it's infantile behavior directed at anyone that he perceives has slighted him. And it's infantile behavior that's putting our alliances with our most trusted allies at risk. And it sets such a poor example at home. And it foments that behavior at a community level because people model. And they're modeling inappropriately because they have a leader setting a bad example. So I hope more people will step up. But I'm quite frankly not sure, and I'm not sure I'm going to bet the loose change in my wallet or my pocket that will happen.
But can I ask you about something else that's been in the news? And that is this dossier that has been in. I'm going to try and. There was a former British intelligence agent who helped prepare essentially a big package of opposition research in the last election that claimed, among other things, that there had in fact been an effort on the part of the Russians to sort of skew the election for Donald Trump, that they had been compiling, incriminating information that, in an audience of students, I'm not going to, about his personal behavior. Now today we find out in the Washington Post that this dossier was in fact paid for by the Democratic National Committee and the Hillary Clinton campaign. And in fact, this former British intelligence agent, while there was some research being done and funded by one of President Trump's Republican rivals, that once the British intelligence agent was hired, that in fact that was funded by the DNC and the Clinton campaign. Now, I know this was before your watch, but presumably you must have some curiosity about how this came about and what this dossier said, and why you guys didn't kind of come forward and acknowledge earlier that you had funded it.
I find this issue somewhat curious because here's a news flash. Candidates conduct research on their opponents. And in the case of Donald Trump, the imperative for that is to not do that is political malpractice. Why? Because Donald Trump refused to release so many documents. Let's review the bidding here. Here's what we know going into 2016. And by the way, you correctly point out, I was the labor secretary during this period. Here's what we know, though. The Russians hacked the DNC. They hacked it with the purpose of helping Donald Trump out. They didn't hack the RNC because they wanted Hillary Clinton to lose and Donald Trump to win. There have been incredible, questionable, possibly criminal engagement between members of the Trump campaign and the Russians during the election. All of those things occurred. And the Democratic Party, or anyone, and the Republicans, as you correctly pointed out, were doing the research on Trump before the Democrats did. We would be committing malpractice if we weren't to do that, because Donald Trump has a very shady and complicated history in Russia. And so I'm glad that this research was being conducted, and the research centers around whether the Trump administration and the Russians conspired to steal an election. That's serious stuff, my friends. And you know what? There's a criminal investigation. And I used to be a prosecutor, Karen, and I got information from a number of sources when I would do an investigation. And this is a very professional team there. And they will take a look at all of the information. But, the real issue here is whether Donald Trump's campaign, and perhaps himself, was in cahoots with the Russians to affect and impact our election.
So the DNC had this information before the election, but decided not to go forward with what was in the dossier. Is that because?
Could you? I'm not sure I'm understanding your question.
First of all, did the DNC actually know what they paid the lawyer who commissioned the dossier? Did the DNC know what was in it?
Well, again, you're going to have to ask folks who were at the DNC at that time.
Asked.
Well, no, I mean, I learned about the dossier a few days ago. Okay.
Is that how is that possible? I mean,
well, because you hire a lawyer, and we hire lawyers all the time who hire third-party vendors to do their work, and so we knew that we were paying for opposition research at the DNC, but we didn't ask questions about who they're hiring in the context of doing their research. And what we know is that Donald Trump, we had very strong reason to believe that Donald Trump and the Donald Trump campaign and the Russians were potentially conspiring to affect the election for the President of the United States. That's the issue here, and that's what Robert Mueller is looking at, whether there was criminal conduct in connection with the 2016 election. And so that's why when I say I'm a little befuddled, the notion that candidates conduct research on other candidates, especially when the other candidate has refused to release information that is germane to the judgment that voters have to make. I mean, one of the really interesting questions to me, Karen, is, why is it that Donald Trump so frequently attacked our allies, like Angela Merkel, and why was he so friendly with our adversaries, like Vladimir Putin? That's a really interesting question that I think is germane to a voter. And one of the issues is, well, maybe they were working together to affect our election.
do you think in retrospect the DNC should have used, and the Clinton campaign should have used this information?
Well, I mean, in retrospect, I'd do a lot of things differently. If I had information back then that suggested that there had been involvement by the campaigns, I can't really play hypothetical games. We often look at hindsight, and the hindsight that I look at is how did we allow the Russian government to conspire, I believe, with a campaign to affect the results of the election. That's an affront on our democracy. And so that's really the question that I ask with hindsight is, how do we prevent that from happening again? That's why the Mueller investigation is so important, because it took a while for the American people to understand the impact of Watergate. At first they were, this is just a amateur break-in. We don't need to worry about it. And it was only after a period of time that that we understood the importance of what was happening. And so I think this is the same thing. That's why we need to have that's why we need to make sure that this investigation is carried out. And
do you think it'll play out that way? Because, I mean, Richard Nixon did not have a Twitter account and an ability to every day stand up and call everything #fake news.
Well, and I think that's what makes where we are so much more dangerous, because, and that's the challenge for Republicans. You were saying, will more Republicans stand up? Oh, they confront a Twitter tirade. That's the challenge for companies who speak out. That one tweet can send their stock price plummeting, and so that's what we have to be mindful of, and that's why this stuff is really serious.
Okay, well, it's time for us to go to questions, and as we do here, the first 3 questions we're going to reserve for University of Chicago students. So if you would just make your question a question, step right up.
Okay. My name is Michael Siffer, and I'm a third year in the college and a college Republican, but I'm very glad to be here with you today.
I'm glad you're here.
I have a lot of questions about Russia, but I'm not going to ask that right now. My question for you is about your statement that you're investing in technology, and more specifically, so I'm in tech, and we've seen recently the amount of private data that's out there, and what we've been able to do with machine learning like figuring out exact psychological profiles and how we can use data to influence people to make decisions. I'm wondering, what is the ethical line as far as what data you can use and to what extent you can use psychological profiling to influence voters, and how will you avoid crossing that line at the DNC?
Well, I think you ask a very important question, and I think respecting privacy is critical. At the same time, we want to make sure we have a granular understanding of what makes voters tick. When if I turn on my, if I want to check out for a moment, I'll sometimes get on ESPN.com. And if you go on my ESPN.com, I'm a Buffalo Bills fan, I'm a Boston Red Sox fan, and I'm a Washington Wizards fan. And because they know my click habits, the stories about the Buffalo Bills, the Boston Red Sox, and the Washington Wizards come right to the top because they've learned more about me. Those are the things we're trying to learn about voters so that we don't inundate you with 20 emails. We only inundate you with 1 or 2, and we talk about the issues that you care about. We need to develop a better relationship with voters so that we can connect with them. And we haven't done a good enough job of that. At the same time, there's an ethical line that we always have to be mindful of. And I think there's a lot of discussion about what happened in the Trump campaign and whether that ethical line was crossed. And those are the conversations that I think are really, really important moving forward. Tech can be a remarkable force multiplier, especially if you're trying to connect in rural communities where you can't be everywhere, especially if you're trying to connect with millennials like yourself who communicate via your smartphone. But at the same time, we have to be mindful that there are lines in the world of privacy, and those are the conversations that we engage in on a regular basis.
Do you think that the FEC should set some form of ethical standard or
I don't think
regulation?
the FEC is competent to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perez, for joining us today. My name is Ronan Shatsky, and I'm a second year here studying public policy and economics. I'm also from New York City, and I'm glad to hear that you want to focus on getting Democrats to turn out in places other than my hometown, because we definitely need support in other parts of the country.
Amen.
But I read an article today in the New York Times talking about how there are several House races that would be thought to be competitive, where there are not yet strong Democratic candidates. I don't remember the particulars, but there are quite a few that were mentioned in the article in various states of the country where there are yet to be strong, serious Democratic candidates to turn those House seats. So I'm wondering if you know what that article is talking about, and if you could talk more in particular about how you're going to reach out to some of these areas, not along the coasts, in areas that maybe the Democratic Party has been neglecting of recent years. If you could give a couple of specific examples about what you're trying to do and what still needs to be done in order to help Democrats win.
Well, it's a great question. It's an important question. And let me give you the example of Virginia. We have 100 members of the House of Delegates. And in an ordinary year, if you look at the past decade, Democrats have been running candidates in roughly 40 of those 100 seats. That's why the Republicans have a sizable advantage. This year we have candidates in 88 out of the 100 districts, and they are spectacular candidates. We have millennials, we have incredible candidates of color, we have an incredible representation from women. And we've been able to do that in partnership with many of our brother and sister organizations, whether it's organizations like Emily's List or Emerge, so many organizations that we work together with. In the U.S. House races, if you actually look at the filings, the candidate filings, there have never been more Democratic challengers filed this early in the cycle as there are now. So while we have more work to do, as that article points out, we have actually done more work than ever. We have to take 24 seats to take over the House. And the universe of races that are in play is something like 70 or 80 seats. And that's a tribute to the fact that candidates have been stepping up big time. We always have more work to do, but one thing I would challenge you and others in this audience is let's get more millennials there running, because it's your time. And I'm meeting a number of millennials who are indeed doing that, including my daughter at the University of Wisconsin, she's got a friend who's a senior. She's going to graduate early in December and go back to the city of Providence and run for the city council. I love that. So step up.
I'd be happy to help.
Hello, thank you for being here. My name is Christina. I'm a fourth year, and I care a lot about voter engagement, and I've worked a lot on that in the 2016 campaign. And I have a question about messaging within the Democratic Party. So I know there was a bumper sticker that came out as part of a testing of different mottos for the 2018 midterms that said, Democrats, have you seen the other guys? And I think that that was disappointing for a lot of people to see because it was a little bit smug and kind of missed like the main takeaway from 2016 was that there's a lot of good people who are fed up with the system to the point that they would vote for Donald Trump even if they are like still good people. So I'm wondering what you think we can do to make our messaging more accessible to people who are upset with the system.
Well, I very much agree with the premise of your question, which is that we can't just be against something. I have many issues with President Trump and the Republican Congress, but that's not enough. We have to demonstrate what we stand for. That's why I describe my job as both a infrastructure job and a messaging job. And the message of the Democratic Party, and I was with Phil Murphy in New Jersey, and he really encapsulated what my parents taught me, which is the Democratic Party always had your back. We had the back of folks in the Great Depression when we passed Social Security and all of the minimum wage. We've had the backs of everybody when LBJ courageously passed the Civil Rights Act, which meant liberty and justice for all, meant all, not just a few. And we had folks' backs in Medicare, Medicaid, and that's what we keep doing. And we've got to fight for the issues that people that care about the most. They want a good job and a better life for their kids. They want an education secretary who actually cares about public education, and an EPA administrator who understands that climate science is real. They want candidates who understand that a woman's right to choose is not simply Roe v. Wade, but it's about women's economic empowerment. And they want us to be building more schools as opposed to jails. And they understand that when we're fighting for these basic have your back issues, that's when we're at our best. And when we put hope on the ballot, that's when we're at our best. Because I think one of the biggest freedoms that's at risk right now is the freedom from fear. This president's putting the fear of God into immigrants. He's putting the fear of God into working people. He's putting the fear of God into my Muslim brothers and sisters, and that's just not right. And so what we're out there doing is saying, dreamers aren't only a group of folks seeking citizenship status. Dreamers are what we are as a nation. We're a nation of dreamers and doers, and the Democratic Party has been doing that. So I know it's a work in progress, and your question is absolutely spot on, and we're talking about what we stand for, and more importantly, we're putting those values into action. You see that in the debate on health care. We believe that health care should be a right for all and not a privilege for a few.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for coming tonight. I'm
Pleasure
a
to be here.
Democrat, and this question concerns the superdelegates. So I acknowledge, and most people do, that they weren't the sole reason that Hillary Clinton got the nomination, and they wouldn't have made a difference if they weren't there. But a lot of people feel that it sort of makes the process undemocratic, and it makes it almost insurmountable to defeat the party elite's favorite candidate. So is there any consideration to getting rid of the superdelegates? And if not, how do you justify that to Democratic voters who feel like we don't really get a full vote in the primary?
Sure. We have a unity commission that was established at the Democratic convention last summer. Their most recent meeting was last week in Las Vegas. There's another meeting coming up later this year. And the purpose of the unity commission is to figure out how do we make elections fairer, how do we make the process better, and how do we make sure that we're working our hardest to persuade voters that the Democratic Party is the party that has your back. And one of the issues that we are debating as we speak is what is the role of superdelegates. And there's been a robust discussion about that, and I'm going to be getting the recommendations from the Unity Commission around the end of the year, and I'm looking forward to what they have to say, because we brought together folks who represented a variety of viewpoints, because I firmly believe that when you're wrestling with important questions like the one you're asking, you want to make sure that every perspective is reflected. And so I'm confident that we're going to get some good recommendations at the end of the year. I haven't gotten them yet, so I don't want to prejudge the work of the commission, but stay tuned, and I hope you'll make sure your voice is heard.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm not a millennial. I have clothes older than many of the kids in this room.
Millennial is a state of mind, okay? It's a state of mind.
My question has to do with fundraising. I've heard from their stories and so forth that there are challenges in terms of fundraising, both from big donors and from small donors. I'm someone who did contribute monthly to the Clinton campaign, and I'm in a little bit of a quandary now in terms of how to get the best bang for my buck, so to speak, in terms of helping you. On an average day, I get between 10 and 12 hits from at least a half dozen different organizations. I will have to say that as having had some fundraising in my background, some of these things are horribly written. They are of the variety of send us money or your dog might die.
Pants on fire.
Kinds of things. So what is your sense of collaboratively getting the money to the right places, and are there particular sites that you would recommend?
Sure. Well, let me, you asked, there's a number of questions embodied in your question. Let me try and take them all on.
Right.
The thing about, if you look at the history of RNC and DNC fundraising since going back to the early 2000s, what you'll see in these off-year cycles is that the RNC consistently outraises the DNC. The explanation for that is pretty simple. They got more rich folks supporting them than we do. And when we took over the House in 2006, for instance, the RNC had outraised the DNC by about 2 to 1. And we're right at about that right now. And the good news from our perspective is that as we rebuild, we've been making a real focus on small dollar investments. 70% of our money is coming from small dollars, which is our best year ever. Our first quarter, we raised about $5 million from small dollar donations, average size $22. And so we're making progress in that front. And what we have to do in order to address the 12 emails a day question is in part responsive to an earlier question about technology. Because our new chief technology officer is a guy named Rafi Krikorian, and he is a spectacular talent. He was one of the original 25 employees at Twitter, and he built their infrastructure. And he's now at the DNC with a spectacular tech team. And what we want to do, I've told him that once in a while. You brought us Trump. But what we want to do, the more we are able to know about your preferences, you care about climate. Well, then rather than sending you 12 emails, we send you an email that's focused on the issues that you care about. And we send it precisely at the time of day that you happen to open it. Because we know you're an early bird, so you like to do things at 7 o'clock. So as we get more information.
It's just 12 emails from you. It's from a multitude of different organizations.
Well, I'm going to be limited in my ability to stop that, because there is actually a plethora of new organizations as well as the legacy organizations. What I would say about the DNC is here's the unique part of the DNC. Our force multiplier potential, because of our infrastructure, the voter file, we're not simply helping a Senate candidate or a House candidate, we're helping candidates up and down the ballot. When you build that organizing infrastructure and the technology infrastructure, and I haven't even talked about our voter protection infrastructure, when you build that infrastructure of success, training and best practices, you're helping candidates up and down the ballot, and you're helping our friends in the progressive ecosystem. Our tech team right now is working with a number of organizations who are helping candidates, because the local Indivisible chapter in certain places, they don't have a CTO. And so we ought to be helping them, and that's exactly what we're doing. Good. So thank you for your questions.
Thank you.
Hi, Tom. My name is Xavier. I'm a first year here at the college. Thank you for coming out. I appreciate all the talk about unity and stuff, but I do feel like the superdelegate system really undermines that. First of all, many of the superdelegates are lobbyists for petroleum companies, for Goldman Sachs and that kind of stuff. Secondly, there were released leaks about collusion between the Clinton campaign to work to disempower the Bernie Sanders campaign. And I just want to know how you can keep the image of a grassroots party focused on the people when there seems to be a lot of corporate influence.
Well, again, the Unity Commission is answering and addressing the superdelegate issue, and we're going to have answers, hopefully, or recommendations by the end of the year. If you look at some of the things we did last week at our DNC conference that we had in Las Vegas, one of the resolutions that we passed related to corporate donations from certain sectors. So, I mean, we're listening to folks and we're acting, and I look forward to the Unity Commission's report because it's important, as evidenced by 2 of your questions tonight. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. My question, I was interested to hear you say that there's been a lot of messaging and working at reaching out to people, because my experience has been the opposite. So if it wasn't for Indivisible and groups like that, I would have no idea what's going on with all the races around the country. I'm someone who went to Iowa and Wisconsin for Clinton and for Obama, and I hear nothing from the Democratic Party except for the emails that say, give us money. Sometimes they have a different subject line, but then 2 lines in it says, give me money. So I unsubscribe from them if they provide no information. So what is the Democratic Party doing or going to do about reaching out to people who've worked in multiple campaigns to get people involved?
Right. Well, again, first of all, thank you for your serial activism. And one of the things that gives me so much optimism about Democrats moving forward is that not only do we have the serial activists who've been doing it a long time like you, but we've got so many new people as well who, frankly, hadn't knocked on doors before 2016 and are now incredibly mobilized. And what we've been doing is to make sure we partner with them, to show them. I'm a firm believer that you've got to put your values into action. So I was knocking on doors down in South Carolina for Archie Parnell with the local Indivisible chapter. I've been, we had an investment this summer we called Resistance Summer. It was a down payment on organizing. And we had a training, and we had 140 partner organizations who participated in that training, because in order to earn or regain the trust of folks, we've got to put our values into action every day, whether it's on job creation, whether it's on DACA, whether it's on whatever the issue is that matters most to you. We've got to show you that we're there for you and we have your back. And because we haven't been in every zip code, we have fallen short. That's why I took this job. I knew we had to up our game, and that's exactly what we're doing. It continues to be a work in progress, which is why I love coming to events like this and hearing directly from people in the community about areas where we've got to continue our work. And so I've heard loudly and clearly everywhere I go that we've got to do even more to make sure we hone our message. And your point is well taken.
By the way, how important is Indivisible for this grand strategy of yours? Because I've got to tell you, as I travel the country, I run into them everywhere.
And it's not just Indivisible. It is, there are just so many new organizations that have emerged, and people have asked, well, what's your take on that? My take on that is I'm thrilled. And to come back to Virginia, and Virginia's on my mind because it's less than 2 weeks away now. We'll be at the end of the road there. And we've been helping a lot of folks in the ecosystem who, again, they don't have a CTO. You know, we're helping them build apps. We're helping them connect to voter files. We're helping them organize. And with an eye toward we're all in this together, because they collect data, they give it us, we can give them data and help them. That's the virtuous cycle of building that ecosystem, because too frequently as Democrats, we're bowling alone, and we've got to get our oars in the water in synchrony.
So speaking of Indivisible, I'm Lauren Tucker, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Community Relations for Indivisible Chicago.
Oh, thank you for what you're doing.
I'm going to say I'm going to ask a question that's a little bit of a left turn because we live in a blue state, and one of our biggest challenges at Indivisible Chicago is that we're in a blue city in a blue state.
With a Republican governor.
Yeah, with a Republican governor, but you talk a lot about gaining the trust, and we're built on a Tea Party, kind of the Tea Party model, which means we also have to hold accountable Democrats. And we've been trying to figure out exactly how do we start holding our elected Democrats to the fire, because we've got some significant corruption, we've got some significant non-participation in voting, all up and down the lines. We've got a very interesting situation with our state legislature, and I think we're trying to figure out how do we start holding our own people to the fire so that we can continue to build trust with the people of Chicago and the people of Illinois.
Well, I think it's, I made a point when I was an elected official of having contact with my constituents on a regular basis. And it wasn't just contact with my friends. I wanted to have conversation with everyone because it made me a better legislator. And that's what we're trying to do as Democrats. We didn't listen to enough people. And as a result, people lost sight of our message, and people, in some cases, lost trust in our ability to lead. And that's what we're working to turn around in our rebuilding, in our organizing, and in our modernizing. And I've been so thrilled. I've done a lot of work in Arizona, and because it was a full employment act, frankly, for civil rights lawyers, all the stuff they did. And a lot of the people I worked with when I was doing work in the administration, I came out as DNC chair, and they were part of the local Indivisible chapter. And we had a great hug. And then we got right down to work because I love what you stand for. And we are going to win seats and win back this Congress and take back this nation one community at a time. That's why, in response to your question, thank you for what you're doing.
Well, we've got 6,000 plus people, so we're ready to mobilize and organize. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Tala Mountjoy, and I'm in the business school here. And I wanted to ask, there's been some talk from prominent business leaders on getting involved in politics. Mark Zuckerberg has done some focus groups. Howard Schultz has indicated some interest. So are you concerned with the Democrats moving more to the left, the Republicans moving more to the right, that in 2018, third-party candidates will play a bigger role, maybe to a Macron effect?
Well, I would imagine that we will have a double-digit number of Democrats vying for the Democratic nomination. And I welcome that because sometimes I hear people say we don't have a bench of presidential candidates, and I couldn't disagree with that more. You're going to get to know some mayors, you're going to get to know some governors, you're going to get to know some House members, senators, perhaps business leaders. I think that debate is spectacular. And my role as DNC chair is to make sure that the playing field is level for everyone, that everything is fair and everything is transparent. And secondly, and equally importantly, my role is to make sure that we are building the infrastructure of success so that we are helping Virginia and New Jersey this year, we're helping Democrats up and down the ticket elsewhere next year, and we're ultimately helping the presidential candidate. And I think I've spent so much time with so many business leaders who understand that, frankly, if you want to grow jobs in this country, put a Democrat in the White House. And look at the facts and figures on that, and it shows that. But the perception is different. And so we've got to make the case, and we've got to make the business case. And I think we can.
Thank you.
And I think this is, unfortunately, we could go on all night, but I think we're down to our last question. Oh. It's all on you.
This is the most important question you will ever ask. Don't get nervous.
My name is Wolf Hertzberg. I'm a second year. So, Mr. Perez, you've said multiple times tonight universal health care is a right for all. Mm-hmm. Nonetheless, the party has not put into its platform Medicare for all. Senator Sanders, the current iteration of his bill for Medicare for All, is currently on the Senate floor. It has 15 co-sponsors in the Senate. They include many or most of the, at least in the Senate, of the members of this bench of presidential candidates you're talking about, people considered to be the future of the party, Cory Booker and Kamala Harris and so forth. So in 2020, will Medicare for All be in the party's platform? Will the DNC embrace it? I'm no expert, but you're the expert, but it seems, based on what I've just said, that's the way the wind's blowing. And if not, as it isn't so far, despite many calls for it, why not?
Well, I believe that, and the Democratic Party platform is very clear in saying health care should be a right for all, not a privilege for a few. The Affordable Care Act has gotten us 90% of the way there. And it is a crowning achievement of Barack Obama. The question presented is, what's the best way to get to the last 10%, from 90% to 100%? And I will concede that I am not an expert. But I have looked at this issue, and there are countries around the world that have gotten to universal health care in different ways. Some have used the approach that Senator Sanders recommends. Others have used a more market-based approach to get to 100%. I don't know what the best way is, but I know that recently in Vermont, they tried the single-payer model, Governor Shumlin, and it was well-intentioned, and it didn't work. So what I want to do is get us to 100% in the fastest way possible so we help the most people possible. And in the meantime, what I want to make sure we do is understand that in the here and now of 2017, our biggest threat is that we've got a lot of people, starting with this president, who want to take us from 90% coverage down to 50% coverage, or even less, because they don't believe that health care is a right for all and not a privilege for a few. And so I honestly don't know what the best pathway is to get us to 100%. And I think the Democratic Party, I can't imagine an issue where there's a starker difference between Democrats and Republicans. We're now in the middle of a second tax bill, a tax cut for rich people bill. The first tax cut for rich people bill that we debated was the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. Now we're just doing the same thing in a different vehicle. So I'm proud of what we've done as Democrats, and I'm proud of what our platform already says. And I am hopeful and confident that we'll continue that march toward 100%. And I don't, quite frankly, know what the best way is, but I don't want to tell that person who's part of the 10%, I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait longer because we've chosen one pathway that it turns out may not be the fastest pathway. And so I think we're aligned on values, and this to me is a perfect example of where we have to be very careful not to allow this issue to turn into a litmus test for Democrats, because we all agree that health care is a right for all and not a privilege for a few. And we're all fighting like heck. The unanimity that we had in the face of the repeal was our greatest strength. Our unity is our greatest strength, and it's Donald Trump and the Republicans' worst nightmare. And that's why I applaud the introduction of that bill, and I respect the other senators on the Democratic side who aren't sure whether that's the best pathway forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for what has been a really stimulating evening. And to our audience, thank you for the great questions. And I'm sure the chairman's going to go back knowing that people are really concerned about those superdelegates. So,
among other things.
Anyway, thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you.